Hello again. Now, I'm sorry to see the number of people who comment here saying such things as "we was kings," written phonetically as though in broken English or some dialect. It is devoutly to be hoped that nothing of the kind will be seen in response to this video. These comments are prompted, of course, by the claim by some black people that their ancestors ruled independent African kingdoms or even entire empires. I think that the name Wakanda has cropped up once or twice. Creating this fictional history has become something of a cottage industry for some people over the last decade or two. The thesis which they advance is that there were, before the arrival of white colonists and slave traders, sophisticated civilizations in sub-Saharan Africa whose existence has been deliberately suppressed by white historians. This is of course nonsense, but Gresham College, who give free lectures on, I don't know if anybody's ever attended any of the lectures at Gresham College. They give free lectures on all kinds of academic subjects to the general public. They've felt obliged to invite a speaker for Black History Month. In the description to this video, I give a link to the Gresham's website, which tells us about Robin Walker, the man who wrote a book called When We Ruled. He has followed this up with many other books, which are about as factual as the works of Eric von Däniken. What the lecture he is to give in October is about is what he claimed was a black civilization in Kenya, which built palaces from stone, and indeed mosques, houses, and an entire city. This is odd, of course, because there are no other stone buildings of this kind in sub-Saharan Africa, constructed by the indigenous inhabitants. How did this city spring up from nowhere? The answer is simple. It was not built by black people at all, but rather by Arabs, who colonised this part of the African coast. On the coast of East Africa, which is today part of Kenya and Tanzania, the clues are very clear to see. After all, the capital of Tanzania is Dar es Salaam, a name with obvious Arabic origins. The chief language spoken in that part of Africa is Kiswahili. Swahili was once known colloquially as Coast Arabic because of the large number of Arabic expressions and loanwords which it contains. The very name of this language is derived from the Arabic word Sawahil, which means coast. Two things brought Arabs this far south from their homeland: ivory and slaves. These two valuable commodities went together, and the trade in one stimulated the other as a matter of course. Ivory is obtained from the tusks of elephants, although the horn of the narwhal and tusks of the walrus also yield this useful substance. Ivory could be carved into ornaments, used for jewellery and combs, inlaid into wood to decorate furniture, and 100 other things. It served the same role that plastic does in modern society. There was a bit of a difficulty, though, for the Arabs in collecting ivory, and that was that elephant tusks are very large and heavy. The average tusk is something over 2 metres in length and weighs about 51 to 99 pounds. Once the Arab traders had landed on the coast of East Africa and built their settlements, they then travelled into the interior of the continent until they came across elephants. But how could they transport such weighty items as their tusks back to the waiting ships on the coast? The answer to this problem was brilliant. If Africans could be captured and made into slaves, then they could carry the tusks, if necessary, hundreds of miles back to where the ships lay waiting. Instead of just ivory, the Arabs now had two useful things to sell when they returned to their homelands. The quest for ivory in East Africa thus became closely linked with the acquisition of slaves. Not only was this a way of avoiding the ruinously high costs which using hired labour would have entailed, it effectively doubled the profit for each expedition. Long before the Europeans began exploiting West Africa for slaves, the coast on the other side of the continent was the exclusive province of Arab slavers. They built ports and started settlements there, from which they exported ivory and slaves to North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. It is these settlements that are described in the lecture to be given at the Gresham as the lost cities and amazing heritage of Kenya. They're not lost cities at all, they're simply Arab buildings. Arab influence on what is sometimes called the Swahili coast of Kenya and Mozambique dates back well over 1,000 years. There is evidence of Arab architectural design in the style of building from about the 8th century onward there. This was, of course, the time when the Arabs were expanding at breakneck speed from their traditional homeland and forging their way across North Africa and into Europe, also into the Middle East and Persia. East Africa was just another part of the world which they sought to control. The title of the lecture which Robin Walker is going to deliver at the Gresham, as I say, Lost Cities and the Amazing Heritage of Kenya, is about his claims that the palaces and mosques and Arabic inscriptions left by the slave traders who built ports from which to export ivory and slaves were actually the work of a black civilization. This is not true, but nobody likes to point it out. A culture which spoke Arabic, built mosques and exported slaves to the Arab world. This is not a lost city at all. There are plenty of European buildings like this in West Africa, forts and slave compounds and so on, which correspond exactly to what is found in East Africa, but nobody seems to want to pretend that they're part of a lost city. This is just the opening shot of Black History Month in Britain this year, and I'm sure it will not be the most bizarre or fantastic of the fairy tales we shall be hearing. In the description to this video, I give a link to the lecture at the Gresham, and you can read a brief biography of Robin Walker, who is known as the Black History Man.